Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Vladimir Bosanac, one of the co-hosts here of the Spatial Show, and by day, co-founder, publisher of The Registry, a West Coast commercial real estate news organization.
Vlad, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well.
Elliot Golan. By day, I am the co-leader of the real estate practice at Allison, a global marketing, PR, communications agency. And in my spare time, and I mean my main time at this point, I'm here with Vlad for the Spatial Show.
It's good to see you again. Today's guest is someone that I interviewed a couple of weeks ago. So Clark Lowe, he's the president and CEO of O'Connor Construction. It's sort of a national-based construction company with basically he sits in New York, but the company
Okay.
is sort of spread out, virtual. So we're going to have a conversation with him about what he thinks about the construction industry here in 2025. A little bit of a hint. He's quite bullish, actually, which is very
Really?
interesting. Yeah. And so we'll hear what he has to say about that. But interesting model that he's pursuing, an interesting company. So I'm curious, what people think about this conversation.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing more about it because when you talk to most investors and developers, the idea of breaking ground on anything is still, I don't know, man, still something they're not looking at very strongly.
Yeah. Interestingly, given his model, so being kind of national, what he basically does, and I think what his company does really well, is they'll kind of helicopter in kind of a SWAT team of people that run projects, and so they're able to bid on things basically around the country, and I think that gives them a little bit of an edge because they're not beholden to just one territory and hope that everything kind of works out.
Right.
And so, he's able to, bid on projects, in Arizona and Florida. Interestingly, I think some of the areas where he is very active has been around some of the, red states, if you will, which I think, this is not a political statement. I just think that there are some areas in those states that are on the up and up, and he's capitalizing on that. So it'll be a good chat.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's been another week. We got lots of headlines in our industry, lots of stuff going on. The wonderful and somewhat terrifying thing about real estate is that there is no downtime. Nothing ever stops. I mean, I think the top thing for me on my mind this week, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is apparently we are moving governmental organizations out of DC.
I heard that.
Yeah, so um, the Trump administration gave them until mid-April to suggest places to relocate. Now, this isn't entirely novel. There have been, this type of thing has taken place in the past. During his first term, in fact, we moved the Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service as well as the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Both moved to Kansas City. And I mean, it's very simple for a real estate person to understand rent in Kansas City versus rent anywhere in the DC area.
Yeah.
It's like a foreign country, right? It's like it's not even in the same hemisphere.
Very, very true. I have to say, the cynic in me, and coming from a family of, municipal politicians. My grandfather was a mayor. There is a bit of a play here, I would argue, and sometimes these things are used to help some of the constituents in certain
Right.
territories. I wouldn't be surprised, even though they're sort of saying, hey, where could we move? It's basically given an option to maybe some states that are going to be friendly to this administration that may actually get some of these agencies. It'll boost their employment, obviously, and that kind of thing. So, again, that's a cynical perspective, but I do also think that perhaps some of them could be moved elsewhere where we could, as an entity or as a nation, save some money. If in fact we are trying to save money.
I guess the big question for me is, I don't know the scale that this will happen, but if it's a significant number of different agencies, what's the employment impact? Because there has to be a percentage of those people that is, by the way, I'm guessing not a very small percentage, that doesn't want to move from Maryland or Northern Virginia or wherever they actually live, since I doubt most of them live in the district.
Yeah.
And just, I'm gonna change to raising my family in Wichita. Like I just there has to be an issue with that.
100%. I mean, I don't expect more than maybe 5%, 3% of these people to actually relocate, right? So I think we're probably going to see unemployment, suffer, or employment rather suffer, unemployment increase, perhaps, in DC and Virginia and Maryland, around sort of that area. It's very plausible. I think some employment numbers came out today, and we're recording this on Wednesday, March 5th. But some employment numbers came in today. Only 77,000 new jobs were formed. I think we're going to start seeing unemployment numbers go up, especially from some of these federal agencies, layoffs and that kind of thing. So it's going to be a protracted, I think, period of us kind of trying to find our footing here, unfortunately. And we just got our hands on a list of all the properties across the country that the federal government is trying to sell. And I emphasize sell because I'm not sure how they're going to sell it. I mean, in this market where nobody's buying, what are they going to sell and to whom?
Right.
I am sort of curious how that's going to be. And even if somebody were to buy this property, this organization would likely want some kind of assurance that they will, the agency will bring employees to their entity, right? So they're going to have at least someone occupied, right? Otherwise, who's going to occupy them, right? I mean, we can't just sort of hope that KPMG is just going to keep growing its office in DC. They're going to need, millions of square feet,
right,
of people, right? So that is, it's an interesting period.
Yeah, and then there's a ripple effect that hasn't been talked about yet, and maybe this isn't as dramatic as it sounds, but the glut of available office space that would hit the DC market, not even for sale, to your point, I don't know who the heck is buying, but just in terms of vacancy, and this comes after Amazon sunk some ungodly figure into kind of, the HQ2 type thing. And if people have to leave that area because either they choose to follow the government agency wherever it goes, or B, become unemployed, and Northern Virginia is not a cheap place to be. So unless you find something really quick, you're relocating to Wichita or something like it anyway.
Yeah.
So how does that factor into the office vacancy rate, which is already, of course, high in basically every market? And then moreover, kind of Amazon and their huge bet on the Northeast, which of course still has plenty of big population centers, but it was around DC for a reason.
I am curious if these government buildings are sort of part of what these, what typically the brokerage firms, when they do their reports, count as inventory.
Right.
I don't know that. That would be interesting to sort of ask somebody, and I'll try to investigate that, because I think what's going to happen, we just reported today a sale in Seattle, a building that's over 500,000 square feet, sold for about $15 million. So roughly $28 a foot.
Wow.
So, I think some of these properties will probably sell at what they leased for a year, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, I think this is coming. How exactly it's going to play itself out, I don't know, right? But I think we'll probably see more stories like that. So, kind of a interesting time.
Very. As if Office needed any trouble. I mean, I don't know that inflating the occupancy rate in Missouri does much for our overall industry.
Right.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this all
Yeah.
shakes out because, as
Yeah.
you mentioned, I think last week, this isn't something you can just do, right? It's not like, a small tech firm moving offices. It's a little bit different. It's federal government. Things
Yep.
move slow.
Yes, they do. Yeah. Hey, I had a story I wanted us to cover really briefly here. There is a report that we recently kind of stumbled upon, and it is basically an outline of how many affordable housing units across California. And again, I apologize to our listeners who are sick of hearing about California, but it's a big state, and so this is kind of where my attention is. But I think it's probably similar to other parts of the country. But in any case, there's likely around 45,000 affordable housing units that are not being built across the state, only because we've run out of funding. And what's interesting about this report, which was conducted by the Enterprise Community Partners, is that in order for these 45,000 units to be completed, it only needs about 1.8 billion in state subsidies. And in addition to that, another maybe 580 million in state tax credits. That strikes me as not a lot of money to build this amount of property. And in their estimate, they're saying these 45,000 units would effectively, over the course of something like 10 years, they would impact over 500,000 people, right? That would kind of live there and go through it. And so it seems like a no-brainer. Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, the politics will get in the way, but if we just look at things in a vacuum, that seems, and I could even make an economics argument that seems like good money spent, because a lot of these folks, due to the overwhelming majority of their income that they're currently having to allocate to housing, you have to think about the sort of double side of this thing, right? So if you're, kind of struggling but not quite Section 8, or there isn't an available Section 8, and you're doing something like 60 or 70% of income on, rent and food and all that, like the bare necessities, if we can reduce that percentage to 30, 40, even 50, you know what happens with that superfluous cash? They don't put it under the mattress. They patronize our restaurants.
It goes back into the economy.
That's right. So I would love to see someone, much more intelligent than me do the math on, in a conservative expectation of a boost to general economic spending, discretionary spending, all that stuff. And let's be conservative, just for argument's sake. How long before that 1.8 billion is completely paid back anyway, just through boosting the economy? And I'd be very surprised if it's a number that is, seemingly difficult to swallow. I have a feeling it would be a lot quicker than you think.
I think you're right. I'm hoping that whoever listens to this podcast also looks at that number and starts thinking about how can the private sector maybe step in and help in this situation, because I think, again, that does not seem like a big number. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about that property in New York trying to be sold for $1 billion, one building, right? And that's more than half of essentially what this organization is saying that we need. So that strikes me as kind of an interesting point, and I hope that given everything going on, that if we really want to boost housing, if this administration is serious about this, that I think finding 1.8 billion will literally be, I think, a drop in the bucket in terms of some of the other spending that's being considered. So it is in California, so I don't know if that's a fiery issue, but that's not for me to decide.
Well, it's got to be a public-private partnership anyway, right? And I think we can all accept that the federal government's influence on this in terms of financial involvement is going to be small, if anything, in this hypothetical world where we address this topic. And that has actually nothing to do necessarily with this administration versus the general sort of ideologies of the parties. Like, the Republican Party is on decreasing spending. That's like among the top things, regardless of who the Republican is. Smaller governments, like that's the thing.
That's our jam.
Right, right. And I'm not even making an editorial statement if that's good or bad. Like factually, that's a huge part of the Republican Party's sort of identity. But at the state level, I mean, Gavin's got to do something. And with this number not being what it is, and let me just be a campaign manager for a moment here. If he can get something like this done and then wave it around in 3 years, like a bloody t-shirt, I don't know, man. I don't know. No matter what either party says about trying to solve housing, with which every party says,
Right.
If he can come into the primaries and say, hey, I fixed California, affordable housing is not, the most significant issue facing it anymore, elect me, I think that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially since this housing will probably, benefit, folks like teachers and, service kind of folks, right? Maybe some blue collar folks, right? This is where that's going to go. And I think it can go a very, very long way. That's 100%. Certain. So anyway, I do hope that this spurs some thinking around this and maybe some initiative around finding money for these units.
Yeah, I mean it's wildly needed. I think we all know that.
Yeah.
Well, on the other side of figures, I believe it was 2 weeks ago we talked a little bit about CMBS, and I'm a self-proclaimed capital markets nerd. So we saw it coming. Delinquencies and distress in the CMBS universe jumped to a 12-year high. January was 12.9%. January of 24 was 2.6%. So I don't know, 5.75x, something like that in a year. I mean, the last time community banks saw this was 2012. Right, this isn't just, real estate had a bad year or two. No, this is seismic, that we have this level of delinquency in the multifamily market.
It is, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's going to go away anytime soon. I mean, you and I talked about this a little bit, and the big driver behind here are obviously interest rates. Interest rates really turned a lot of these properties upside down in terms of value and valuation rather, and I think it made what maybe were profitable properties in the past sort of not profitable right now. And so, as much as these owners were trying to kick down a can until their 3-year or 5-year loan, expired, they're faced with, a very different environment here in early 2025, where the lenders not only are asking for perhaps double, maybe even triple in some cases in terms of interest rates, but they're also asking them to, put down more of a contribution, right, towards the loan. And so it's a really, really tough time. And it's a bit of a weird situation because we don't have enough housing. And so most of multifamily housing seems to be, 90%, 95% occupied. Yet we're dealing with, failing ownership, if you will, right? So that is a very interesting kind of, perspective. But this is next, I think, 18 months, 24 months, we're going to see a lot of this go through the system. And I wouldn't be surprised if the CMBS number goes a lot higher too.
I think it will. I mean, we have two things that we have to take into account, and these are not prognostications or opinions, these are things that are. So, owners locked in, and I can say this even on the single family front, owners locked in 2 or 3% a few years back when the time was good. I refinanced my house. I didn't even need the equity. I just said, you want to give me 2.5? Great. Let's rock and roll. And now they're looking at 6, right? They're looking at 5.5, and what that does to cash flow, what that does to your margins in terms of shrinking them and your leverage rates, that is tough for anything but really.
And you can't raise your
pro
forma rents any further. That's the other thing, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is, and I will admit, perhaps I have been wrong. I have been a big anti sort of coverage level of kind of the wall of maturity's doomsday that's been prevailing the real estate media for several years now. But 500 billion, give or take what's under John Gray's couch cushion in CRE loans are maturing this year.
Yeah.
And multifamily is going to have to refinance that. And again, they're not going to refinance it at 3. They're not going to refinance it at 4. So what does that do?
Yeah. What's interesting about this discussion also is, when you and I were talking about it earlier, so here we are, 4.5, 5, 4 years effectively, if you want to call it, kind of behind kind of the kickoff of COVID, right?
Yep.
I think you were mentioning that it was like March of 2012, when the rates, MBS rates, kind of kicked up higher again, which was about 4 years following the GFC. And so it's interesting that we're seeing kind of this pattern of 4 year periods of where you're really beginning to see the impact of a recession or of a disruption, however you want to call it, on the multifamily industry. So kind of a lesson learned, I suppose, right? That there's this 4 year lag, to which people try to work things out, but it's inevitable, right?
Yeah, and the stimulus and kind of revitalization of the economy that took place in 12 and the couple years preceding it,
Yep.
we're not experiencing right now. So, I mean, even this report from Cred IQ that kind of gave us these numbers, they're suggesting it could hit like 15% by the end of the year unless something dramatic happens. And I mean, I talk to real estate people every day, and so do you. No one's talking about something dramatic happening. In fact, quite the opposite. Things are kind of gonna, if we're lucky, just be moderately bumpy. That's what we're hoping for.
Right. Right. Well, I
So
think you and I have dealt with real estate people, right? I mean, these are probably the most optimistic people in the world.
right,
If you're ever down or need a therapy session, go talk to a real estate
yeah,
developer.
that's right.
They can make anything look, sunshiny and rosy. Although I'm not sure this year is that year for them. So it is
No,
going to be interesting. At the same time, this kind of disruption provides an opportunity for, I think, great wealth to be made. I think there's
of
going to
course.
be people coming in who have cash, who have the ability to acquire these assets at a huge discount. And we're going to probably see a lot of, multifamily deals be forced into happening simply because the current owner just can't maintain the financial structure that they have with their lenders.
Yeah, I mean, this is a part of the cycle that the last, I want to say, 2 years, we've been talking about. Where is this? This is a very normal part of the cycle where regional owners have to sell massive portfolios to Blackstone or Invesco because they have the liquid. They're more than happy to sit on 3 or 4 years of probably
Yeah.
negative cash flow for the long-term investment of having these properties that will one day be just bloody fine.
Yeah.
So we've been waiting for that, and I think this suggests it may be coming. This suggests that Prue and sovereign wealth funds and some of the big PE firms are going to start, munching, kind of the pawns, if you will.
Yes, and Fairfield, which is a big multifamily
Yeah.
apartment REIT based in San Diego, just announced that they raised a very big round for one of their latest funds, and so I think this is kind of the beginning of that. I recently read a report from Essex Property Trust, which is a West Coast based, again, apartment REIT, sort of from San Diego to Seattle, up and down the coast. They're very bullish. Interestingly, their bullishness comes from the fact that there isn't enough inventory, so they feel that the value of what they own is only going to increase, simply because the
Yeah,
simple sort of supply and demand side stuff,
right.
right? And so, I think in certain markets where it's not overbuilt, or in certain markets where you're able to enter with a certain financial structure where you can turn a profit.
Yeah.
I think again, there is demand for housing. That's not going to go away. What you're going to have to adjust is the back end stuff, right? How do you get into it? How do you finance it, right? What you can expect in terms of pro forma income, cap rates and that kind of thing. So, you know, um, interesting. I think for those folks that have cash or can raise cash, this year might be the year where they start sharpening their pencils. Really, really, really nice, right? So we'll
Yeah.
see.
There's been a lot of fund closures in the last, 6 months, and the other majorly overblown story of the last couple of years, the hashtag dry powder. You know, this all suggests maybe it's gonna hit the market because
Yep.
it could be a fabulous time. Again, you're
Yep.
talking supply and demand is the most basic
Yep.
thing. Well, buy low, sell high is also
Yep.
pretty bloody basic, and I think that's
Yep.
what we might see.
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, Elliot, for our final conversation point, we'd like to kind of go into somebody's mind here. Last week we ventured into my head. Today we're gonna
Yeah.
go into some deep thoughts, by Elliot. So tell us what's going on. What have you been thinking about, in terms of commercial real estate lately?
Well, mostly about Skynet, which hopefully some of our listeners will get the reference to the Terminator and becoming
Yep.
self-aware. But another massive piece of news was a $2 billion loan for data center development in Utah. And it's got all the right players, right? JP Morgan and Starwood are helping to fund. CIM is behind it on the development side. Like these are all
Yeah.
players, right? And it just goes to show, I mean, it's hard for anyone to get a construction loan for anything right now. But these guys can come out and get what I think may be one of the largest, if not the largest, construction loan in sort of history.
Yep.
They can get it, and I'm guessing it wasn't even that hard. And the reason is the asset class, is the phone and the two laptops I have on my desk, and all of this, right? It's endless.
Yeah, I mean, data is information, right? And access to this information has become a utility, right? It's like water, it's like energy, like heating, food, right? It's become something that you just cannot work without, do anything without. And I think data centers are only going to be more relevant and more important in our lives. Interestingly, this is being built in Utah, right?
Yep.
I think there's a couple of things there. I think it's the location, geographic location of that, which is probably, I would argue, more proximate to sort of West Coast, maybe Northwest, right, where it
Hmm.
may be utilized by companies that we know in across the Seattle and the Northwest region, but also maybe Northern California. One of the big things I think also about Utah, and I don't know the specifics about this deal, but one of the challenges that I think builders, especially on the industrial side, and even mission critical stuff like this, data center, is access to power. So they must have identified a really good source of energy that can kind of help them go through this. Just as an anecdote, I'll tell you, I was talking to a couple of industrial people who are trying to build some data centers around Silicon Valley, and they're basically saying this region is out of energy. They can't produce any more power.
Right.
Which is sort of kind of amazing to think, right? That we've already reached that point where we don't have enough. And so I think what you're going to probably see is spillover effects into maybe some of these marginal markets. Marginal meaning they're sort of
Right.
on the geographic periphery, not marginal in importance. For all our listeners in Utah,
Yep.
it's an interesting kind of time, and I think data centers will only continue to be more important.
Yeah, and let's not, we haven't mentioned it yet, other than my reference to Skynet here, but we are at, I don't know what, the, we're not even in the first inning. We're in the pre-game warm-up to the relevance AI will have on our world. And if we're
Yeah.
already running out of power and we're already rushing to build data centers and fund them, and this isn't even counting Facebook or Meta, excuse me, the plans they had to try to build some massive data center that's still going through. I think the quote was that it would cost like $200 billion. Yeah, I'm not joking. That's full Austin Powers pinky and everything. Um, we are not going to be able, as developers, whether it is entitlement, construction, all the time it takes to do these things. Meanwhile, AI is going to grow so much faster. So they just got this loan. I mean, by the time they even do smiling pictures with Barry Stern like in a golden shovel, by the time that day even happens, they're going to need to find the next parcel.
Oh,
Like you know
100%.
what I mean? It's
Yes.
already too
Yep.
late. Who cares? Like we're
Yeah.
so behind.
I 100% agree, and I have heard some people talk about AI as a tool for kids to cheat on papers and exams and that kind of stuff. And if you are a skeptic, if you are an AI skeptic, I invite you to go to YouTube and just search for AI agents. And it's not going to lead you down some crazy path, I promise, but it'll just show you how many companies are now popping up who create these automations that utilize AI, where AI is integrated into things that, process work, do stuff that you and I do on a sort of regular basis. You will be blown away at sort of where that already is. And, I don't think that's going to be, I don't think we're going to see less of that going forward. You know what I mean? It's going to be even more. And I listened even recently on one of the podcasts, the Hard Fork podcast. They interviewed the CEO of Anthropic, who basically made sort of a small prediction around 18 months, 24 months from now, you're going to see AI that's going to be basically doing stuff of low level, mid level employees.
Yep.
I think that's going to be here faster than we think, and I don't even know if construction can move at the speed that we're going to need data and energy to power all of this. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mean by the pre-game warm-up, right? It's not we haven't even started the game, and once the game
Yeah,
starts, the ball moves a little bit faster, man. It doesn't grow at pace; it grows exponentially,
that's right.
and it's going to be something that I don't think we're there yet, but we're probably going to have to find a governmental solution for because, to your point, I just don't think we can build fast enough. I mean, if we literally came out as a country and said anyone who wants to build a data center on any vacant parcel, you are pre-entitled. Like, I mean, even if we went that draconian, it's not the entitlement, man. It's literally there's not enough hammers, wrenches, and hours in the day
For
for us
people,
to get right for us to keep up with the demand
right?
for
That's
this thing
right.
is going to be.
That's right.
And movie references are sort of my thing, but I think we're entering a big change, and I'm very curious to see, does this lead us to a place where we have to completely rethink our economy? I mean, it's that level of disruption. I
Yeah,
mean, this
yeah.
is
It will evolve 100%.
right. Everyone loves to talk about
Yep.
disruption, right? Like that's one of the cute words of the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. I would be very surprised if there's been anything since literally the Industrial Revolution that is going to have this level of like tectonic shift
Yep.
on our existence and the way we work, where we work, how we work, who works, all of that.
Yep.
So that's in my mind, and I don't know if terrified is a little dramatic, but we talked several weeks ago about how people don't like uncertainty. Well, here's the biggest dose of uncertainty there is.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I will add to that, if you try to reject it or fight it, you're not going to win. So I
Right.
think you have to figure out ways to, be part of it somehow, kind of ride that wave. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging for you to try to kind of maintain what, I don't know, even 5 years ago was sort of a norm, or not necessarily even a norm, but like, sort of a proficient way of doing something, right? So anyway, well, with that, one gentleman that I know is very excited about the future is our interviewee coming up here shortly. So we're going to have a conversation with Clark Lowe, President and CEO of O'Connor Construction, who is going to talk about his company, what they do, how they do it, and how excited he is about the prospects of construction across the United States. So, Elliot, great seeing you again and connecting on all these wonderful discussions. We'll be in touch very soon. Talk to you next
Yep.
week.
Talk to you next week. Thank you.
Hey, Clark, good afternoon. How's it going?
Hey Vlad, how are you? Going great here in the Northeast, getting ready for the next polar vortex coming tomorrow.
Yes, yes. Where do we find you? Where are you?
Hudson Valley, New York. Just got some ice coming in tomorrow, so yeah, getting ready to batten down the hatches for that. Probably have the kids home from school. Northeast type things.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Stuff we hear about here on the West Coast.
Yeah, you guys
So
have fire problems. We have
that's
we have
right.
ice
That's right.
problems.
That's right. Yes, yes. We all have our own issues, unfortunately. So, well, Clark, it's a pleasure to have you here on our show. Would love to obviously hear a bit about your company, but before we go there, tell us a bit about what you do and kind of how the winding road of your career got you to where you are today.
Yeah, that's we'll keep the long story short. So grew up Kansas. That's where my formative years were. Russell, Kansas, Bob Dole, Arlene Specter country. And right after 9/11, the December after 9/11, I joined the Marine Corps. Shipped out a few months later. Did 9 years in the Marine Corps. Flew C-130s. Flew on C-130s as a nav. So been to, I don't know, 50, 60 countries. And then just after my Marine Corps years, 2011, I did a couple stints in corporate world, Target, Gap, Cardinal Health, and then kind of meandered my way through operations and ended up landing in the facilities management slash construction side of Cardinal Health, and kind of was like, hey, I'm a little bit good at this stuff and didn't know a lot about it, but seemed to be very interested in it and good at it, and slowly made my way to purchasing O'Connor. Me and my business partner Zach purchased O'Connor about 14 months ago, December 2023, and that's how we ended up where we're at.
Excellent, excellent. And tell us a bit about sort of that journey. Did the leadership path interest you? Did the industry interest you? Maybe a combination of both.
Yeah, so it's a funny thing. So for about 15 years or so, maybe towards the end of my Marine Corps journey, I kind of knew I was going to be I wanted to be a CEO of something. I didn't know what at that time. So I immediately dove into, I did a lot of work with like Toastmasters, and with the Marine Corps, I was the head of the mentoring leadership training program there. And obviously Marine Corps is very renowned for growing leadership. So I've always had kind of a lifelong love for leadership. So out of the Marine Corps, I got my undergrad in the Marine Corps, and then when I exited the Marine Corps, when I worked with Gap, I got my MBA. And shortly after getting my MBA, I was an adjunct professor, taught graduate business for 7 or 8 years. So just kind of like I don't know what, at least what I think is kind of this normal CEO journey of like lifelong learning, meandering your way through different
Sure.
positions of an organization, operations, and then slowly you kind of make your way there. So I don't think I'm any different in that aspect. I don't have any Like there's no, specific like, hey, this is what I did and how I ended up where I was. It's just like a very long journey, like, many people who find themselves in leadership.
Yeah, and that's part of why I asked that question. I think it's important for folks who are watching this, listening to this, also to understand that. I think it's no path is the same. There's no predetermined way to get there, right? And I think that's sort of part of this conversation is to highlight that as well. Tell us about O'Connor. What is the kind of legacy of the company? How did it come to be, and sort of what about it appealed to you and your partner?
Yeah, so O'Connor was founded in the late 70s, originally in Ohio, by John P. O'Connor. He had like a civil engineering architect type background, and then decided to start his own general contracting company. And then in the early 80s, mid 80s, they expanded down to Pinehurst, North Carolina, which is where we're currently headquartered. And then just the leadership of the company has, I would say I'm the third generation of leadership. So John was leading the company until the mid 90s, and then Bob Bailey and Chris Jordan took over in 1996 ish, somewhere in there. And then now me and Zach took over in 2023. So the company has always had its roots and foundations in industrial commercial construction. So we always say we're a non-residential contractor. We do some residential and like high rises and stuff like that, but we're not necessarily building houses. So yeah, we're a non-residential commercial contractor, with a lineage back into the 70s, and that was really the biggest piece of purchasing the company. We did have some equity backing, some investor backing to stand up our own company, but we very
Sure.
quickly learned, like construction companies circa 2022 at the time, it was going to be very hard to win work. Bonding was going to be an issue. So really we set out to buy a pedigree, and very, fortunes, the universe kind of aligned with us and O'Connor and the previous owners. And, we were able to move forward with the deal and kind of move the company into the next generation.
Yeah, I have one question for you. There aren't that many ice storms in Pinehurst, North Carolina. So, Clark, I'm curious, why is the headquarters there, and you're in Hudson Valley, New York?
Yeah, so that that leads into a lot of our remote workforce is remote. So all of our APMs, most of our project managers, even a lot of our field personnel, all of our project supers right now are traveling site supers. So we
Okay.
have like a full remote work platform. So this allows us to be anywhere at any time. One of our larger clients is a national client as well. So we have work going on with them in 10 or 11 states right now, and we have actively work going on in 13 states right now, across the country.
And that's a very, very interesting point. I mean, typically when you talk to construction companies, they tend to be local, right? For the most part. But I'm curious, this distributed workforce model that you've adopted, is this something that you guys started off? This is how you grew into the business. Tell us, how did that originate? And it sounds like at this point, it's a bit of a kind of an advantage, right, for the organization. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it's certainly a differentiator for us. As I work through construction, one of the problems that we constantly ran into was like personnel, and how do you, right, we're a multi, we work in multiple states, so, and where there's multiple market penetrations that we want to get into, so how do you facilitate that? So obviously you can facilitate it through merger and acquisitions, or you can facilitate it by having like a national platform. And for us, that national platform was in the way of like just leaning fully into remote, because it was kind of hard to do two things. Like for regional companies, you think about their problem is always finding regional talent, which gets recycled among companies. Sometimes you run out of work for the guy, the next company picks him up. We see with site supers, we see a huge increase with compensation right now. So it's like, how do we facilitate this? And really the answer was I mean, at least to me, was very clear. We need to have a platform, a remote workforce platform that can get us into, as the Marine Corps would say, any climate place. So how do we land in any state for any owner? And it's one of the great pedigrees that we have in working with one of our big national clients is we can be anywhere for them. We can be in any state. We can do any job. And that's how we're going to exponentiate the platform. Not to mention, it opens up unlimited amounts of hiring key
That's
positions.
right.
So when we go
Yep.
to key positions, we don't have to we don't have to compete, and we're actually pulling. We just pulled a guy with some Whiting Turner experience, and we're bringing over a PX out of Gilbane. So we're like our platform is certainly working, and it's creating a lot of energy, especially among younger millennials and Gen Z. We have wonderful feedback from that workforce, and our company is very young at the same time, which leads us to really great horizons. And the team is very close knit, and our central problem at O'Connor is not like the construction itself. Our central problem that we have the whole team rallying around is really this idea of remote work, right? We've all seen
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
return to office, Elon Musk, government's all recalled back, Amazon, all Silicon Valley banking, they're all recalling people back. And we're like leaning against that, saying, hey, we're actually going more remote. And so we're rallied around that idea as a team. And it's one of the things that I really try to press is like companies, your core problem doesn't need to actually be the problem that your customer needs. The core problem can be something bigger, which helps pull the team together and kind of cement the team and what we're trying to do here at O'Connor.
That's super interesting. Typically, when somebody is assigned to a project, how long are they away from home, or do they come back on the weekends? How does that work from a practical point of view?
Yeah, so we've realigned our processes and roles and responsibilities from like a construction standpoint. And we have many of the same titles, like assistant project manager. What we've done is we've taken all of our assistant project managers, and that now is all part of a group, what we call supporting operations. So we have a whole group led by our supporting operations leader, and it's this entire group of APMs who do nothing but like support the operations of the company. And then really what our project managers and site supers are, they're kind of one person married very closely at the hip. So what I say is our project managers are responsible for the strategic execution of the project, and the site supervisors are responsible for the tactical execution of the project. So we've realigned how work looks in construction to support
Yep.
this remote model. And then with every site super being a traveling site super, we get them home very religiously every 4 or 5 weeks. They get a full paid week home. We pay for their travel to and from. And it works out very well because our site supers work 40 to 44 weeks a year. They get a lot of time off. They get time back with the family, and then really the week that the site supers are out, our project managers travel and cover that week of work. So our project managers travel, basically 1 to 2 weeks a month. So it works out
Yeah.
in what they
Yeah.
do. Site supers, that we're able to deliver on what a lot of companies can't deliver on with traveling site supers, which is the number one pain point we hear. And then in the symptom of doing all that, all of the paperwork, 80 to 90% of the paperwork within the company falls on our supporting ops, which is our APMs. So we've tried to align those things like, hey, what do project managers hate doing? They love making decisions. They love being strategic. They love doing budgets. They hate paperwork. So we've really like kind of killed mosquito with cannon, so to speak. And we have a lot of APMs, and all they do is they facilitate all the paperwork of the project.
This is super interesting. I'm also curious, have you implemented some, technology that maybe other companies don't typically use to manage this? I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit here in terms of people management, but this stuff is interesting to me also because it is innovative in a sense that you are kind of pushing the envelope in terms of like where you're able to work. So I'm curious about that as well.
Yeah, so we internally we use Autodesk, which is a little sister of say Procore, the very very similar products. And yeah, we use Autodesk. It has all the same functionality. The real difference in us is like how we matrix the teams. So with every project that we have has 2 or 3 APMs on it, and that gives us a lot of coverage. And really, what that's for is less about like could we only put one APM on a project? Sure, but
Yeah.
if we have disruptions, if we have someone who's out on vacation, or we have someone who's sick or out on maternity leave, now like you have to have someone step into that project. So we've actually doubled and or tripled up on large jobs our APM count. So it's completely seamless to the owner. Like if we have someone, like I said, if we have a big event, like someone has a baby, it's completely seamless because the other person in the project was already in the project from day one. They already know everything. They have great situational awareness. So allows us to deliver this seamless process, and at the same time, it mitigates a huge amount of risk of having these people that are paperwork um, core paperwork executors. If they whatever leave the company or go out for ill, sick, FMLA, you have that big void that now someone has a huge job in stepping in and learning. So we've actually offloaded a bunch of our risk from that, and we've had great feedback from architects, from
Yep.
owners, from all stakeholders. We have wonderful feedback on our communication processes.
Yeah, very interesting. So give us a sense of kind of the geography. Then, I mean, you can cover basically any market in the country, but where have you guys been active, and what does this allow you to do from a geographical point of view?
Yeah, so it's like with being in the geography, we have wonderful trade partners across, coast to coast. So it gives us access to doing that. And also B, we're experts at penetrating new markets. We can go into any market, we can penetrate well. We're marketed well. We have a wonderful relationship with all of our industry partners. We're known as great payers, so we always like to keep that forward. And right now, like we got work going on from Utah to Texas, up to Illinois, New York, down to Florida. So pretty much the eastern 2/3 of the U.S. We've got work going on right now. Getting ready to start a job down in Miami. So yeah, it's that footprint allows us very quick access to markets, and we understand what's going on in these markets. It helps us understand like what markets do we want to get deeper into. Like right now, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, that whole kind of region, southeast region, is absolutely exploding with work. Arizona is another very hot state. Texas is very hot. So people, I think, with a lot of where remote work is going is people are saying, hey, I can have this remote work job and I don't necessarily need to live in this, you know, some states are a little bit, tax suppressive or business suppressive states, and they can move, or they can move closer and be with family and stuff like that. So we see that happening a lot, within the remote work world.
Makes sense. And what type of work are you guys getting from you mentioned industrial, multifamily, other commercial work. I'm curious, what is the scope of sort of the different projects you guys are working on?
Yeah, so right now we're really targeting like our niche market is like 10 to 25 million dollar projects. We love, like every contractor in the world loves ground up work. It's kind of like the best work. It's the easiest to facilitate, has the least unknowns. But yeah, that's kind of our core market. We do everything from pre-engineered metal buildings to small government centers, schools. We're in quite a few schools right now, collegiate schools doing work there, whether it's renovations. We just got done doing some athletic fields for University of Pembroke in North Carolina. We've got a health and science building with Fayetteville State University in North Carolina. So we're both in the private and public sector. With what we have going on with work, and we're looking at some hospital work right now in central New York. So it's all like we've got a lot of momentum going on a lot of fronts.
That is very interesting. So before I jump into some of your kind of overview of the market, which I would love to hear your perspective on, tell us a little bit more about. You mentioned this in our call when we met for the first time. You do a cost plus model, right? Tell us, why is that different from sort of some other models that maybe traditional firms have adopted?
Yeah, so obviously with there's a lot of pent up demand right now, especially in the commercial spaces, and in that space, a lot of times the standard is kind of the gross maximum price contract, GMP contract. That's really the standard. What we're starting to work our commercial clients towards is a cost plus model where we say, hey, here's the knowns. We're very open book. We show them all the bids that we get. We go through with the client, like here's the 4 electricians that we had bid. This guy's low, but we may not recommend him for these reasons, XYZ, whether we may some experience that we've had with them or they may be too small with the project. So it becomes this collaborative process, and what that does is it helps the owner understand like what's going on behind the scenes with their project, the effort that we're putting in the project, and at the same time it helps us equalize the risk, right? So if I have to carry a GMP project, a lot of time I have a lot of float in there for if something comes up, right? Owners hate
Sure.
change orders. If something comes up, I've got some contingency in there for that. I may, in other areas where I may have some unknowns, we may have some internal allowances done for that. We may also get to a point where it's like, hey, they say the project is going to be like 10 months, but we really think it's going to be like 14. So we may budget for that. So those are all ways that we make money. So what we've done is we've kind of started having this go to cost plus contracting, and all of our owners that are in cost plus contracts, when they do studies, they feel like that they're actually saving money going with cost plus contracting versus gross maximum price. So it's really about getting owners comfortable around that, the model that's a little bit different, and going with it, because there's a lot of opportunity for them to save money. And then on the change order side, the cost plus model really works in the owner's benefit, because you're seeing the exact change order from the sub, and then with our markup, and that's it, right? What happens with a lot of change orders? I spent a lot of years on the development side. Like, you hate change orders because like, hey, we just fought about this other change order that they didn't get. Now I got another one that I do have to give them. Now, like, how much is it fattened up to cover the one that they didn't
Right.
get? So I kind of
Right.
understand the game from all sides of the table, and that's really what we're trying. We sell with cost plus contracting, and the estimating team just does a fantastic job in driving bid density and finding qualified contractors to do work. And I think right now with our cost plus clients, we're like 100% rework return with them. We get called back for more work every time. They love them. Once they have the model with us, they love the model. They love how transparent it is. We have nothing to hide. So we tell them, like, this is what we pay people. This is our fringe. This is, we have nothing to hide. And I think that resonates very well with our clients.
Yeah, and how does that help you? I suppose in this environment where maybe there might be some higher costs for labor, materials, things like that that typically tend to kind of drive, if you will, some of the costs. Right? Tell us, how does this model then help mitigate that?
Yeah, so it's business is risk, right? So what it really does is, like, if you force us as a GC, and the contractor right now is a perfect example with what's going on with tariffs. If I have to speculate what's going to happen with tariffs, that is going to cost you as the owner a lot of money, because speculation, like, I have to be covered, right? Because I have to be in business, and
Right.
my subcontractor has to be in business, or we all end up with a project and a product that's not great for either of us. So take removing it's really just about equalizing risk. Like, if you force us to speculate, yes, I may speculate, sometimes good, sometimes not. So if the removing that speculation and just saying, hey, here's all the things we're gonna try to do to mitigate getting materials in. We're gonna pre-order, we're gonna release orders, we're gonna pay deposits, we're gonna get everything in as soon as we can to maintain that construction continuity. And then if there's tariffs, whatever that is, it is, and it's just a pass-through cost.
Right.
And we have
Right.
that understanding up front, so we're both mitigating risk. Now, some clients will still say, hey, I just understood, thank you, go ahead and speculate. And then we speculate. Like I said, usually it works out very well for the contractor,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we're adding a couple percent for the kids and the wife, and just in case I got something wrong. And you know
Right.
yeah, so it usually works out good for us when we're held to that.
So switching gears, you have an interesting perspective in a sense that you are, spread across the country. You're doing various projects, not just from a geographical point of view, but you're also doing very different projects. I mean, industrial versus sort of a, research and science versus kind of an academic building, all these other things that you mentioned earlier. I'm curious, how do you, and you mentioned this a little bit, you said certain parts of the country seem to be doing really, really well in terms of there's a lot of demand for your work. But I'm curious, where is the construction industry, across the US today? Maybe break it up, if you don't mind, kind of geographically where you're seeing some of this activity, and then also in the type of work, and then maybe in the size of projects. I don't imagine office is going to be mentioned a whole lot, but I am curious also if there is some demand for office somewhere in the country that we just don't know, right?
Yeah, so we'll talk on Office first because that is what's going on in the office world is so interesting. So there is infinite amounts of office space out there right now, but they're still building Office. And I think what that has to do with is developers keeping buildings updated and renovated. So I think
Right.
people that have access and need bulk amounts of office, it's almost better for them to build new office so it can be tailored to like what they want to do versus going into older already made offices that need large amounts of rework on the interior, and just getting those deals to pencil, it can be very difficult right now. So I think the office space, everything else is kind of as you would think, but the office space is very interesting because you still do see, it's not a lot, but you still see a fair number of office going up. But office by and large has the highest level of development vacancy right now is office. You know, retail, like strip mall retail, is on the other side, right? It's at almost all time lows when it comes to vacancy.
Right.
And you're starting to see like a lot of these these online retailers actually going into brick and mortar. You start to see like, especially those value brands of brick and mortar, they're really starting to exponentiate. So the retail, I think there's a lot of pent up demand because interest rates are so high. I think over the next 2 years, especially, even if interest rates are where they are, I think there's a lot of wonderful consumer power there and great consumer sentiment that you're going to start to see a lot of these commercial projects start to release. And I really feel like, on the architect side, they're very busy right now with all these projects coming back to life, and we're starting to see that on the GC side as well as we get into the projects. Mixed use development, especially in the southeast, in the south, across the south. Texas, all the way over to Florida, up to the kind of the Mason Dixon, like the mixed use development is going crazy down there. And you can kind of follow along with, some of the states as they lose population. There's some lagging metrics there that you can see, like California's losing population, New York, kind of those I don't want to be political, but those typically holistically blue states are losing a lot of population now. And I think it's a combination of remote work. I think it's a combination of taxation policy, and I think it's a combination of people wanting to relocate and move closer to
Yeah.
family due to remote work. And
Yeah.
and these, the southeast just has, they have wonderful they have wonderful communities. A lot of these states don't have state income tax, et cetera. So there's a lot of benefits to people moving.
And when you say mixed use, how do you define that? I mean, I know it can be anything almost, but I'm sort of curious, how you define it.
Yeah, so to me, the classic mixed use is kind of the bottom floor commercial, and then the
Mhm.
top floor residential. That's how we're starting to see all kinds of different
Right.
um, areas of mixed use, but kind of usually it's some type of that. Whether it's you figure a full, whatever 100-acre development, a big piece of that development being commercial, and then the other piece being residential. And,
Right.
and you're starting to see all kinds. You'll see condos. One building will be condos that will sell. Another building will be, luxury or mid-market apartments. So that all of that stuff we're starting to continue to see, all of that stuff continue to expand.
Interesting. What about public versus private development? Is one more active than the other?
I think they're both really active right now. Public, there's a lot of push. Biden 2 years ago, 3 years ago, passed the infrastructure bill, which gave billions of dollars to the USDA. Funny enough, they have all the money to. They have a big portion of the money, so that's one of the big things we see in projects right now is all this money got allocated to the USDA for public infrastructure projects, and I don't know that they were necessarily manned to handle all this money. So a lot of projects that have USDA backed funding or backed loans, we see a little bit of slower, paperwork process. But once they get kicked off, they're great. And we see that those projects are constantly coming to life right now. We see tons of fire stations. EMS stations, those are popping up everywhere. And I think it's really this idea since Katrina happened, and it's kind of the dominoes are falling from these last few hurricanes, is we need these buildings of infrastructure,
Yep.
EMS, fire. They need to be able to withstand these storms because
And
that was
first
one of the
responders, essentially. I mean, you're
correct.
describing the first responders, right?
Yeah, so these buildings, there's a lot of rework all over the country on
Sure.
rebuild on building these, and they're built like they're very well built now, but they're built because that was one of the things that came out of Katrina was like
Right.
these firehouses they were actually incapacitated, which led to slower recovery, which led to slower help, and the first responder rates were that whole network was just crippled. So a big portion of we're seeing that in the public side or yeah, in the public side, we're seeing that quite a lot
Interesting.
all over the U.S.
Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned when I asked you what are some of the challenges that you've kind of experienced in the industry, you highlighted sort of some of the sustainability kind of
Mhm.
mandates as one of them. I'm curious, why and you already told me, but for the benefit of our audience, if you can go into that a little bit, I'm curious about what your perspective there is.
Yeah, so sustainability efforts, I think no one can I don't think anybody disagrees with like what it's trying to do. I think the hard part with sustainability efforts is as we get these new ideas for building materials or processes, etc. They start out very small, which means they're very expensive as well. Typically, you have one type of manufacturer which gets into especially in the public realm. Can you technically legally mandate this manufacture with tax dollars? How does that work legally with as equals? There's a whole complex conversation with how that happens. But the hard part to understand is like they start out small, so typically projects are much more expensive, and what it would take to exponentiate something to grow into where it finally has enough buying power and demand to start to drive the price down. So I always use LED lighting as like really 20 years 25 years ago it was just like the advent. I remember when fixtures were like $1,000 a fixture for just a normal like high bay light. Now they're like 150 bucks, and they just pay for themselves very very quickly. But in the advent of those lights, you had to have a lot of supporting public dollars to support those projects, or they never
Right.
penciled. So I think that's the hard part of the sustainability. That's the hard part of the sustainability efforts is like how can we find the next LED lighting and exponentiate it super quick so we can start to see those impacts. And in unfortunately a lot of the buildings right now that go up as net zero or highly sustainable lead type buildings, they're just not seeing the payback that was forecasted. So you kind of see this wax and wane happening with the sustainability. I don't know what the solution was, what the solution is. I wish I did, but it's certainly something that I think from like almost like a societal perspective, we have to understand like, okay, where do we want to get to, and then like what's the blocking and tackling steps that need to happen to get there,
Right.
and like what industry partners are gonna start to step up and start to essentially pay more for these things now, so we can learn, and eventually we'll hit another LED lighting, and it'll be another aha moment, and things will be cheaper and offload the grid, and then the same thing will happen again. But it's just about finding those few black swans in the world of sustainable materials, and it's all part of that process.
Makes sense. Makes sense. In terms of some of the trends that you identified also across the country, you did you mentioned that there's potentially going to be quite a bit of mergers in the industry. I'm curious about your perspective there. That definitely makes sense. I have experienced, at least anecdotally here on the West Coast, it seems to be like some of the construction companies are down in terms of what their work is. Several of them have laid people off, things like that, right? Which is usually kind of a sign or a precursor to maybe let's merge with another firm and kind of do this together, right? Eliminate the competition or whatever it may be. I'm curious, do you see that kind of happening throughout the country, and are those the reasons that they would be happening?
Yeah, so I think of it more as like consolidation of power. Right now, manpower is a still in very high demand across all of construction.
Yep.
I always say you could probably double the number of people in construction, and we'd be just fine. Like you could double the number of companies in construction, and you'd be just fine. Not in every area, but some areas are like for every area that's laying off, you have other areas that are like begging for people because they don't have enough work. Like Florida is a great example. Like down there, it's like you can't throw overtime at subs. Like they're like, we've been on overtime for a long time. Like there's no more overtime. So like there's for every area you have laying off. But I think you're going to start to see like a consolidation of power, very similar to what happened within the medical industry and the hospitals buying up all the small groups and all the small specialties to keep everything under one umbrella. And you're starting to get this like wider value chain. And I believe you're going to start to see some construction go that way as well, where you have some larger companies start to buy up. So like, hey, we owned end to end construction all under one roof. We own from design, the architect, all the way through every phase of construction to the end is all carried under one firm. And I can start to see some large construction companies start to adopt that model. And hopefully, and the real inhibitor of that model is actually licensing. Licensing, construction licensing is in an interesting place. I would love to be able to lobby for like a national general contractor's license or a national electrical license that you can take and you're good to work in any state. But right now, some
Sure.
states require some licensing, some don't. Same thing on the architect side. It's some things you need multiple licenses for. Some state one stamp gets you everything. So that hopefully we can get some consolidation there, and I think we can drive a lot of efficiency in construction by doing that. But licensing becomes I think the pain point in that happening um, at a faster rate.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. How do you feel about your pipeline in 25 and 26?
We are like our pipeline is very full, so we're at about 140 million backlog right now for our
Okay.
pipeline, and like we're not even we're a month into 2025, so we got a bunch of bids coming in February. So we're at that pipeline, and we didn't bid at all November, December, January. So we took 3 months off to catch up with projects, and now we're going to be hitting the road hard again. And I think most companies that I talk to right now are very strong backlogs. And it's also coincidentally, I think why you're starting to see the price of construction starting to creep up too, because I think we're starting to see a raise
Yep.
overhead and profits starting to come
Yep.
up on things, which is again goes back to that cost plus model. That's why I think it's why it's performing so well right now. Because
Yeah.
now like even for us, like if someone asks us to do a $3 to $5 million job, we have a lot of money in that job. Like we're kind of like, yep, here you go. If we get it, great. We know we're going to do very very well in that job. And a vast majority of subcontractors are at that point where they have their backlogs are so deep and they have so much
Yep.
work that they're just like, yep, here's a number. Yeah, it's at 40% overhead and profit. If you want us, then great, we'll do it. If not, then they just they keep bidding, but the work they are winning, it's very very profitable work.
Yeah. What do you think some of the concerns in the industry are with respect to the potential tariffs and some of the labor challenges. How do you think that's going to play itself out? Or maybe we don't know how it's going to play out, but what are some of the challenges that you think the industry is going to experience if they end up being negatively, if they end up being sort of the way that I guess we're anticipating that they might go.
I think that's going to test the flexibility of owners and stakeholders, really.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much do you like? What do you want to die on? Do you want to die on that gross maximum price contract? Then that's what you're going to get. So I really think this is going to really shake up the industry and see like what kind of creative contracts can we start to make that has some carve outs for these types of disruptions, tariffs, also allowing alternates within the job. Some architects are better than others at allowing alternates within the work to get things done. So I think really those tariffs are really going to start to test those relationships of how do we either A, how do we get around the tariffs, B, how do we pay for them, or C, how do we alternate, how do we get alternates are suitable alternates to get out of a tariff or reduce the
Right.
costs in some way. And I think that part will be hard to test because, right, like if I'm making a change, I want that in writing, and what does that do to construction continuity of the project, which I think is where everybody loses all their money, is in construction continuity, kind of that scheduling, the blocking and tackling of the schedule, how do resources come together on the project. I think you lose more money there than you will in tariffs and all those other things.
Right.
But I think,
Yeah.
can stakeholders make decisions fast enough and come and understand where they're putting risk fast enough to allow to maintain construction continuity? Or are we at like paperwork war here of like, well, I'm not going to do that until you approve it, and okay, we got to go back to the bank to get approval. Now time goes on, we lose construction continuity, so other things get worse. Which I think that's really going to test the system. I think that's what the tariffs are going to do, and I think the players
Yeah.
that do very well, the developers, the owners, the architects, they're going to thrive if they're able to be flexible
Sure.
and to different types of ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's a recipe for any business in any circumstance, right? Being able to be flexible. I certainly we learned that through COVID,
Yep.
right? The flexible ones are the ones that are still around, so that makes a lot of sense. As we sort of close our conversation here, I want to ask a couple of personal questions. One. You kind of entered this industry from kind of a military background, right? And then kind of meandered your way into construction, if I can call it that. I'm curious for folks who are interested in this industry. How would you advise them to start? What might be some lessons learned in that respect that you would like to tell them?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing is, it's really important to understand you have to build a craft, and building a craft is takes more than 2 or 3 years. So I think that my biggest advice is just around the tenacity and perseverance of sticking with something and learning it end to end. So that's the only way you can exponentiate value in life. Even Van Gogh's early paintings, probably nobody wants them, but they all want the ones later that he painted later in his career, right? So I think that's a piece. I think within the newer generations, I see that begins to get kind of lost on society. So I always recommend like just really have a mind for that perseverance and understand you're like building a craft. Rarely are you in your earning years the first 20 years you work.
Sure. Right. Right. And then lessons learned, things that you would tell your younger self, I suppose, based on, everything you've learned to date.
Other than buy all the Bitcoin, which is the obvious one. I should have bought all the Bitcoin. I think it's I actually, let me pull up. I have this quote that I ran across. I don't want to get it wrong the other day, and this is what I would tell my younger self. It's life gets easier when you learn to tell the difference between what you want to happen and what you need to happen. So to me, there's like I just ran into this maybe 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of brilliance in that quote, and understanding, like, when you can understand, I would tell my younger self to really focus on what you need to happen and not so much on what you want to happen. So, and then really hyper focus on those needs. And one of the things, like the testament to that, I always say is a lot of people think like these large, big personality business leaders have all the genius in the world. And I was like, if you actually think about it, they're actually kind of stupid, because all they're really good at is solving the problem in front of them. Like these big, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, all these guys aren't playing chess thinking like 20 problems ahead. They're just solving, they're very good at solving the most immediate problem in front of them. And then once that one's solved, then they deal with the next one, the next one is. So it's like, be very good at solving the one problem and then see what the next problem is. And I think a lot of people trying to get into business, they want to have the perfect business plan, and they want to have all these problems solved, and they want to have the perfect mousetrap, and they never start. So it's just like, solve problem A, focus on how you solve problem A, so you have problem B and problem C, etc. If you don't ever get it off the ground, then you have no problems at all, because you didn't start the business, and you have none of the problems that you thought you would have.
Right, right. Well, Clark, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Really enjoyed learning more about O'Connor and your background. Best of luck in 25, and look forward to connecting with you soon again.
Thanks, Vlad. You as well. This has been great conversation, and best of luck to you in 25 as well.